Welcome to SportH.E, the podcast that brings you insights and learnings from the best in the business. I'm Ben O'Connell, and in each episode, we'll hear about both the successes and the challenges of our guests as they sought to grow, develop, and improve. In sharing these stories, we hope to inspire and inform the development of sport across universities in the UK and contribute to the growth of one of the best sporting ecosystems for young people in the world. In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Emma Ross. Not only is Emma an accomplished academic, she also has real lived experience, having been the head of physiology at the English Institute of Sport, where she oversaw one of GB's most successful games, the Olympics and Paralympics in Rio in 2016. Most recently, Emma has co-founded the WellHQ, an organisation that is committed to improving the knowledge and awareness of the female body, ensuring parents, partners and professionals can do more and better when supporting women in the future. Emma's knowledge and enthusiasm knows no bounds, and this interview was a real treat to record.
I had to go and say to my boss, by the way, is it all right if I take another 6 weeks off after that? I just knew I was walking into Olympic sports with Olympic coaches, practitioners and athletes, and they were like, what? Wow, we did not know this.
Remember, you can check out my reflections from this episode and all of my other guests at benoconnell.co.uk. Let's get to it then. It's time to welcome Dr. Emma Ross. Welcome to SportH.E, Emma. How are you doing?
Hi, Ben. I'm very well, thank you.
Well, it's great to have you on here. I don't know where we find you today, but I am standing in front of a window and the sun is shining. And so it's been a long time since we've seen this bright light in the sky. So I'm really excited for today.
At last, the rain has stopped. Yes, I'm joining you from the side of a paddle court, actually. So if you hear any pops of balls, that's what it is. But yeah, it's really nice to be here and really looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Well, I was wondering how soon we were going to get paddle into this conversation. So right at the start. So yeah, we'll maybe dip back into that as we go. So to get us started today, can you take us back to your earliest memory in sport? What was it and why does it stick out?
So I think if I was being really honest, my earliest memory of sport is sitting on the side of a cricket pitch, scoring for my dad who was playing. I don't think I'd be able to do it now. I don't, and it was, I mean, there are probably computers for it, isn't there? But it was like a big book, and you're putting each of the bowls and the runs, and that's what I remember. And actually, my dad was a keen, just amateur sports person, so he exposed me to just that sort of community and connection that sport brings. And then later, I guess my earliest memories of my own sports was riding. So I did equestrian until I was 18 and was fairly serious about it. Just didn't have deep enough pockets in the end. But and actually he was then, my driver and my groom and my helper. So yeah, he played a huge role, and a lot of my earliest memories are sort of revolve around him and him exposing me and supporting me to sport.
Yeah, amazing. So we've got some similarities there. So my wife was a keen rider when she was younger, and her memories are of her dad ferrying her around in the car from one stable to another. And she always remembers that at the end of every ride, he would always be there with a can of Fanta and a chocolate caramel. That's the memory that she has from riding.
Yeah. It's actually very lovely time spent with people, because you do a lot of kind of driving to and from and waiting around. And I think those are the moments that you remember, don't you, when you grow up and you look back on fondly.
Yeah, great. Well, so we're going to get into your career in a bit and the work that you're currently doing now, but I understand that your connection to university sport runs very deep, and you were part of the winning women's rugby team at the British University Finals. So I'm wondering if we can just kick off with that. So if you could take us back to that time and what some of your memories are of playing university sport.
Yeah, I mean, I was generally quite sporty before uni, did all the usual school sports, netball, hockey, really enjoyed them all. But and again, this was my dad. He was a very keen Harlequins fan. We would go and watch the rugby, all through the season. And at the time that I was leaving, so I was in my gap year, so I'd just finished my A-levels, women's rugby, I mean, it was already established, but barely heard of, but it was becoming such that there was local clubs that had women's teams, which they'd never had before. And fortunately, one of the teams near where I lived was Crawley, and it just happened to have a couple of international players in. So it was quite a good team, good coach. So I kind of just pitched up and said, can I try? And so I spent sort of 1 year playing rugby before I went to university. Absolutely loved it. And so when I got to uni, I was like, I'm a rugby player. That's who I am. And so I started, carried on playing actually. And I was at Exeter doing my undergraduate. So, and, like most people, I found university sport to be absolutely wonderful, a good way of, having friends, getting out and up at the weekends rather than staying in bed. And I've got friends. I was actually out in Asia presenting at a conference for PE heads of sport, and the person who had got me out there was one of my teammates, and she's now working in Asia as a head of PE. So, really long-standing friendships, even if you don't see each other for years. But I finished my degree at Exeter, and actually the reason I chose Cardiff, it was UWIC at the time, to go to do my masters was because of the rugby, and I knew that they were outstanding, and I was like, I want to go and play really good rugby. So I did, and it was I actually spent 2 years doing my masters at Cardiff, and it was incredible because it was a whole nother level of sport actually. And I think the sport had grown a little bit as in women's rugby, but also they took it so seriously at UWIC, and they really invested. We had 3 coaches. We had a forwards coach, a backs coach, and a head coach. And and who gave up their times in the mornings, in the evenings, at weekends. And we were made to feel like athletes, which was incredible. We trained really hard, and we just had a blast. And we had this heartbreaking point at the end of my first year where we had got to the semi-finals, and we played Loughborough and we drew, and they did some kind of countback mechanism, and which meant we didn't go through to the final. And I have never been so heartbroken over sport in my life. You get so close. So it all became about getting there, getting to Twickenham, because the final was held at Twickenham, getting to Twickenham the next year. And we just, we were, unfortunately, that we didn't have as many facilities as the men, and that's probably an ongoing issue that I see now. So we would sometimes have to go down to the local recreation park before it was open to the public. So we were there at like 6 a.m. practicing moves on just a sort of rec. But it was because we were really invested to get to this final, and we did, and we ended up meeting Loughborough in the final. And we beat them. So that's always been a little bit of a, and not because I did all of my sports study and I never ever went to Loughborough, just how it happened and as a personal choice. So it's quite nice to. I mean, no offense to all the alumni of Loughborough, because it's amazing, and I actually do a lot of work with them now. But it's very nice to say you beat them in sport, isn't it?
Yes, I think it's certainly in the area that I work in. I think lots of people will say, getting a win over Loughborough is always one that you're going to remember, and especially in a final. So, what was it like walking out at Twickenham for that moment? It must have been surreal, exciting.
It was amazing, because I'd been there so many times, again with my dad, and he worked in finance. He got a lot of corporate gigs, and so we'd get lots of tickets for Twickenham, and we'd go and it was amazing. And then to be on it, it was really surreal. And it's obviously, it feels huge. Being the women's university final, you can imagine that the crowd size was quite modest. So they filled up sort of one section of one bit of the stands. But they kept everyone, in the same place. So that was amazing. But nonetheless, it was incredible to play in that stadium. And actually, I don't think they play the finals there now, which makes it even more special almost, because we were able to run out onto that hallowed ground. Very, very special memories. And again, when I was back at Cardiff Met this week, I ran into Danny Milton, who's one of the coaches who got us there, and he's still working at Cardiff. And it's just, again, that moment. And I remember our coach at the time, when we were in the changing rooms, he was doing his pep talk, and he said, like, no matter what happens out there, you will look around at these faces, and you will, if you see them on the street in 30 years time, you'll just give each other a nod and be like, we've done something together here. And that's what sport does, doesn't it? It connects you in some way, that it doesn't matter if you walk away and never see those people again, but if you do, there's something you've shared, a special moment together. So it's a wonderful memory.
Brilliant. And so from there, after leaving Cardiff Met, I then believe you transitioned into endurance running, of all things.
Oh God, how silly.
I read something about that you trekked to Everest as part of a research project. If you could, share with us what you were doing at the time, and professionally, what were you involved in?
Yeah, so I mean, I made a really conscious decision to stop rugby when I finished at what was UWIC then, because I saw actually that it was becoming. I mean, it was so far off professionalised, but it was becoming a space where it wasn't just. I mean, it was becoming more conditioned. You know, the game was becoming. People were actually playing who were strong, fast athletes, and I was like, that's gonna really hurt. So I said, all right, I've played Twickenham, hang my boots up, and I came back and I didn't finished uni, finished my masters, and didn't really have much, on and in terms of sport. And then, unfortunately, the year before, my sister had died from she had a rare neurological disease. So she died just before she was 30. But the charity had some charity places for the London Marathon. So, I mean, that was a really amazing motivation to kind of raise money for a cause close to my heart. So I think I decided around the Christmas dinner table with my family, I said, "Shall I do that?" And they, "Yeah, let's do it." And that's probably like 100 days maybe before the marathon. I'd never run further than I would to train for rugby, which was maybe a 10K here and there. So yeah, but actually, when I started training, I was like, I'm just quite good at endurance stuff, because there is absolutely no part of me that wants to go fast. There is no part of me that wants to, like, be kind of like a Mo Farah springing along for hours. But I'm really happy just kind of putting one foot in front of the other, and mentally I really, really like the challenge. So I did the London Marathon, and I ended up doing 2 or 3 more London marathons, because they are just incredible. And I think if you haven't done a marathon, and even if you walk it, just go and do one of the big ones, because the crowds and the atmosphere, it's just amazing. So I did that, but then I got a bit of the bug of doing endurance sports. So I did an ultra, which was 100K, and then I started doing some triathlons, and I did an Ironman triathlon. I just sort of had this draw towards really long events, and for a while I loved it. I was working at the time at the University of Brighton, so I had all of the South Downs to run on, to cycle. It was just brilliant. Very fond memories of running to work for about 8 miles and then cycling back. Just so active, so active. The joys of when you don't have children in your life and you've got all the time in the world. So yeah, so I did that, and at the time, actually, it was just before I went to Brighton. I was at Brunel University, and um, I I had applied for a grant to go and do a sort of research exchange. There wasn't actually any exchange involved. It was just me going to New Zealand to do some research. No one came the other way, but it was from the British Council, and it was a small pot of money to go and do a joint research project, but actually go and immerse yourself in someone else's lab. And a colleague at Brunel had connections with this research group in New Zealand, who looked at brain blood flow, essentially, under different conditions, whether that was hypoxia or hypothermia, very much to try and translate that into clinical practice. What happens when we have patients who have got low oxygen saturation, what's happening in their brain. So I was, at the time, I was doing brain stimulation. So it was a different type of research, but it was kind of all based around the central nervous system. So we sort of designed a project together, and I went out to New Zealand and did a project where it was an awful experiment. We heated people up by putting them in a hot, like a suit that had hot water being pumped through it. And so we heated them from the outside in, which is the worst way to be heated. Like, if you're getting hot from exercise, it's kind of feels natural. This is just like the turkey in the oven. But then we were looking at what was happening to brain blood flow, and then brain kind of neural output, which was what I was measuring, and whether there was any connection between the two, and kind of really interesting mechanistic stuff about what happens to the brain when your body is in a state that sits outside of our homeostasis. And in the process of planning to do that project with them, they said, well, just after we finish with you, we're going to Everest. We're going to this, there's an Italian laboratory called the Pyramid Lab, and it's just beside Everest Base Camp. It's about a couple of K away, at 5,500 meters. And it's very rare to be able to sort of get a spot. You put your name down, and the Italian government kind of choose you at some point. And they'd managed to get this slot, and they said, "Do you fancy coming?" And I was like, "Sure." Um, and so I was planning to go to New Zealand to do this research project. I tagged on the Ironman to that, and then I tagged on going to Everest. So we did a trek. We walked up with all of our equipment. We didn't carry it. The yaks carried all of our equipment up to 5,500 meters, and we stayed there for about 3 weeks, doing experiments about what it's like to be at very high altitude and what happens to your brain and many other features. Your sleep, we did sleep studies, and then what happens as you acclimate, and what happens when you come back down. It was absolutely incredible. Over the course of sort of 3 months, I'd lived in New Zealand for 6 weeks working, which was just the most beautiful country, done an Ironman, walked up Everest, lived in the Himalayas where you can't get to it but unless you're on foot, and then come back. And I kind of came back and I was like, well, I don't think anything else is going to top that. And it wasn't. I had a real, like, when I worked with the Olympic athletes, they always used to talk about kind of post-Olympic blues. And I was like, that was my blues. I was like, the world's not going to be as interesting as it was the last 3 months.
Yeah, you must have absolutely had to pinch yourself. And I'm fortunate to speak to a number of people through this podcast, and I hear time and time again people talking about how in their careers, one of the best things they've done in their formative years is just to say yes to everything. And it sounds very much as if it was just, I'll go to New Zealand, I'll trek to Everest.
Exactly,
why not?
Exactly. And I think that is really good advice, Ben. Like, just say yes and give it a go, and sort of don't be afraid of failing. And I said yes before I'd done it, organized, had to go and say to my boss, by the way, is it all right if I take another 6 weeks off after that? And I had to do loads of work to make sure my dissertation students were looked after. But actually just saying yes is the best thing, because then you've got to sort it out. And the message I always say to sort of undergraduate students when I'm doing this sort of, like, what have I learned? I'm like, just ask for forgiveness, don't ask for permission. And I think that sort of, that idea of like just getting stuck in and then kind of figuring the rest out is really good advice. And I think probably the more our world is kind of like really visible for comparison and judgment, in terms of everyone knows what you're doing and whether you did it well, and the less likely people are to kind of jump in and go, okay, I'll give it a go. So that, I think that's really good advice. Just say yes.
Yeah, brilliant. And so I may be missing chunks out here, but from there, I then sort of the next sort of stopping off point for you. So 2013, you joined the English Institute of Sport. So that must have been a real high point. Well, it was a real high point for British performance sport right after London. What are some of your recollections of working in that environment at the time?
Oh, it was such a good time. And actually, so I've been at Brunel doing my PhD, then I taught there, then I was at the University of Brighton for about 4 or 5 years, lecturing and researching. And then I had been doing some work with Steve Ingham, who was the head of physiology then at the English Institute of Sport, and we've been doing a few research projects together. I was really keen on getting my students to understand what the real challenges and questions that sport were, rather than just coming to my office and saying, I'd like to do my dissertation on, whether creatine affects X, Y, Z, which might have been an interesting question. But I was like, should we go and ask the people who are like trying to perform at the very best, like what are their questions? So that was how I kind of sort of fostered those connections. And then he phoned me up one day and said, would you like to come and interview for the head of physiology? And I was like, I hadn't even given it a thought, because I guess I just didn't know that world at all, and it's so far away from academia, to be honest. And he was just like, I think you'd be really good at it. I think, you're good at communication. You're, you just kind of feel like you've got the right demeanor, and maybe this would be great. And I was like, oh, I'm just not sure. And he said, well, you know what? No one has actually done it this way around. No one's come from academia and worked as a head of, sports science in the EIS ever. They've always come from within. And I was like, well, now you've told me that, I'm going to just have to do it, aren't I? So I interviewed and I got the job. And as you say, it was just after 2012. So the amount of resource, the amount of excitement, in sport, in Team GB was, probably at an all-time high. but also they'd set this sort of audacious goal for the next Olympics for us to win more medals than we had in London. So there was this sort of challenge as well. And it was absolutely well, in the first instance, it was absolutely exhausting because I went into this world where people didn't say the same words that I'd been using, and you had to understand the ecosystem and the hierarchy, and so it took a while, and it also took a while for me to realize, I'd be spouting all this stuff about, when I went to Everest and I was doing this brain research and doing it, and they're like, well, what does that mean, Emma, for like our endurance athletes? Because they go to altitude, what does it mean? And I was like, well, it obviously means this. And they were like, well, you're still not making it really clear what and it was going through that learning journey of how to translate research into practice isn't just making one step, it's making many, many steps, and also thinking about, how the coach might use that information, how the athlete might, their day to day and how it fits in. And that was a really, really amazing lesson. And I take that into everything I do now in terms of communicating. I think my overarching reflections of my time there are that I work with the most amazing people, really smart people, but who really knew how to get to translate that into action and into practice. And when you're working in sport, you just have to be a people person. You cannot piss anyone off. I mean, lots of people do, but ultimately you've got to bring people along. You've got to influence a coach. You've got to influence an athlete. You've got to work in a multidisciplinary team. So you've got, if you're a physiologist and you want to really have an impact, you've got to work with a nutritionist or the psychologist or the biomechanist. So it's it really was to me about working as teams and working as connected teams. And also in that environment, everyone was really open to growth. They were really open to developing, and they had a really a growth mindset. So that was amazing. And I learned a lot about people development in that role. I learned a lot about what graduates lack when they arrive to us and wanted to be a practitioner. It was very stark. I had probably seen it a little bit when I was in academia, but moving out and then graduates coming with, sometimes a PhD, but not having a whole skill set that I needed for them to actually be able to unleash all of that very clever knowledge. So I remember going back to sort of heads of departments meetings in bases and going, guys, I don't think we're teaching the students what they need to be taught. And I've seen it really shift. And I'm an external examiner at the University of Portsmouth, and I've really seen a shift, certainly in the courses that I review there, about not just employability as a checkbox, but really trying to get students to think about real life experience, to get real life experiences and think about what all of this stuff actually looks like in practice. So that was really insightful. But also one of the things I didn't like about that world was that actually in the sports themselves, even though I felt like I was in a very human world and I was working with teams who were very connected to each other, once you got to the coach athlete sort of little bubble in the middle, sometimes that was a bit brutal. It was a bit the athlete is a machine, a commodity, and it didn't sometimes feel human centered. And it was very hierarchical, very patriarchal, as in there was a seat of power and it was the head coach and everyone had to bow down to them. And I kind of, I struggle with that a little bit, a lot. And the other thing I struggled with was the idea that we couldn't have really psychologically safe, vulnerable, empathetic environments. Well, we could, we tried, but the sports they wanted to be relentlessly restless and uncomfortably uncomfortable and all of those really gritty terms, because and I get it, they wanted to always be innovating, moving forward, staying at the edge of cutting edge. But actually, where I think we could have made a lot more gains is if we had just simmered down a little bit and said, are we listening to people? Are we understanding them? Are we breaking them? Or how do we not break them? Are they happy? Because happy people work harder or do better. And are we creating environments where people can really thrive rather than just survive? And I think I've kind of brought that philosophy out into my other roles. But it was actually in that role that I started the work around the female athlete. So it was just so fortuitous. Well, it was planned, but fortuitous in the fact that it sparked in me something that grew into, what was the next journey and chapter of my life. But I remember being called into a meeting of SLT, and they had some data from Rio, and they said our females bring home about 35% of our medals, whereas in other top of the medal table countries, females and males bring home about 50-50 of the medals each. And UK sport were very data driven, and they were like, can we explain this? And they brought me in because they knew I was kind of, like quite an advocate for women in that space, because there wasn't actually that many. When I was the head of physiology, I was the only head of a department who was a woman at the time. It did change over time, but at one point there was no female performance directors in any sport, a time when I was in that system, and only about 10% of the head coaches were women. So it was a very male centric space. So obviously they wheeled in a woman and said, can you tell us about these gender issues? But I kind of left that meeting, and they said, can you report back at the next board meeting, which was in 3 months? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I went away and I thought, I think that's actually quite a big question. I don't think you can unpick that like in the next 3 months. So I did a lot. I spent 3 months just talking to people. I spoke to people in the Pathways team who looked at like talent ID and sort of transferring people from being a good athlete to a podium athlete. I talked to the innovation team. I talked to all the disciplines. I talked to coaches and athletes. And I just got this real sense that there was this huge landscape of women's sport that was sort of being underserved and wasn't even really being shaped in a way that served the girls and women there. So I sort of went back to the next board meeting. I said, I haven't solved it, but I basically said, like, we have got gaps in participation. We've got gaps in female leadership in sport. We've got gaps in the talent pathway, because girls leave the pathway because they can't see role models beyond an athletic career in sport. We've got gaps in science and medicine because only 6% of the research is done on females. It's like there are gaps everywhere. And I think they all contribute to female athletes not doing as well as perhaps they could, or us losing them out of the system before they reach their full potential. And so they were like, okay, right, well, so what can we do about it? And I was like, well, and I kind of had to, I couldn't sort of attend to the participation stuff because our remit was attached to medals. So I said, what can I do in the space that I'm in science and medicine? What can we do? And so over the next sort of 5 years, I really tried to understand what were the important factors that we were overlooking or not attending to do with being female that could help female athletes either be healthier or more highly performing. And that was a brilliant grounding, because I couldn't just go in and say like, oh, did you know that menstrual cycle hormones influence like women? I had to tie it to, athlete availability, like physical performance, emotional performance. So it gave me a really good grounding, and like what it not just saying things for saying them sake, as in, well, women have this, that, and the other. It's like, okay, if I'm picking something out, I need to then go and find out whether it does have an impact on health and performance, gather that information, and then present it in a compelling way so that people actually do want to integrate it into their world and their ecosystems of sport. So, yeah, so that was my grounding for, I guess, where I've ended up now.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots and lots to get into that, and I can just hear the passion and the excitement coming through from your learnings there. So we're gonna come back and ask some questions in a second just about the work that you're currently doing. But I'd like to just reflecting back what I've just heard, when you first went into the EIS, then did you have that sort of element of almost maybe some imposter syndrome around, you maybe didn't feel that you were in the right space? And what I'm interested in, why I'm asking that is then because then to see where it led you, and almost that you would never have thought going in there that you would end up working in this space that was going to unlock so much stuff and potential for you, and just wondering how you sort of navigated that sort of pathway.
I definitely had imposter syndrome, and it was actually quite a sort of in vogue term at the time. It was just coming into that sort of business psychology world, and but I did, and I was also surrounded by just the cleverest people. Like my team of sort of regional leads, they were just so smart, and and they had, experience in topics and areas that I'd done physiology, I'd done a PhD, but you can only, be expert perhaps in one particular area. And I was like, these guys, why aren't they doing this job? But actually, what I realised is that they were doing exactly the job they needed to do, because they were the experts, the ones who were working with British athletics and supervising practitioners in swimming and cycling were expert in the physiological determinants of those sports. So yeah, so I did have an imposter syndrome, but I also through that had really important reflections and learnings.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. So to where you are now then, so you are the co-founder of the wellHQ, and that sort of came out from this work that you started at the EIS. So can you tell us a bit about the work that you're now doing and what the wellHQ is kind of set up to do?
Yeah, so so it came to 2020, and I knew that I was just so passionate about the work that I was doing with female athletes. And unfortunately, at the IS, I still had another job, like to head up this team of physiologists and be their leader. So I was like, oh, you know what, I'd really like to just do this bit, this female athlete bit. And I could also see that, I just knew I was walking into Olympic sports with Olympic coaches, practitioners and athletes and Paralympic system. And they were like, what? Wow, we did not know this. I mean, I got a sports bra into the kit bag before Tokyo. That was the first time that, like a bespoke, professionally fitted, made for the right type of bra for the right type of athlete. I knew that if that was where we were at the Olympic system, down the pathway and down at grassroots, there would be zero happening. And I wanted to change that so desperately, because it was almost like at that point we had the stats. We knew that girls were dropping out of sports at twice the rate of boys. We knew that girls were going into their teenage years with this sort of physical literacy gap. We knew that we had generations of menopausal women who had absolutely no idea about their bodies. We knew we lost people from the workplace when they had babies and they couldn't return to the workplace. They couldn't return to exercise. We knew that women were generally less active than men across their lifespan. And there are so many issues to fix. And whilst I didn't profess that I thought I could fix them all, I felt like I should probably get, be part of the movement that was trying. So I decided I would take my team up to Tokyo and then let them go and experience the games, and I would step out. Unfortunately, at that point we had the pandemic, so Tokyo got completely postponed. What that did mean is that I left them all basically trying to work out how to be physiologists to athletes remotely. And I remember my last meeting was, they were trying to work out how to get athletes still exercising when they were in a flat. How do I get sailors to keep sailing when they're not allowed to leave? And I was like, okay, guys, good luck. I'll see you later. So they were in proper problem solving mode, and they did brilliantly. But I left, so I just spent a bit of time kind of doing what I'd been doing talks and things around female athlete, but I knew I wanted to grow it into something. I knew I didn't just want to be a speaker. And along the way, I'd met Baz, who was an ex-Olympic rower, as she'd been the GB squad for an Olympic cycle, and Bella, who was a GP, but with a real interest and passion around communicating to women about women's health issues. And we just kind of knew that we all wanted to do something, and we kind of didn't know what it was, but we got together and said, let's give it a go. And I think very quickly we landed on education and sort of people development. And that's probably in part to the fact that that's the world I sort of come from. As I say, I saw the power of like developing people in those roles in sport. But we knew that before anyone could come up with amazing innovations or brilliant research, we had to get a system that actually knew what they didn't know and knew why that was important, and could say the words and weren't embarrassed about topics to do with being female, and women were more body literate. So we were kind of focused on people development, workforce education, and over time, that's kind of expanded to consultancy and sort of insight and discovery work with sports and brands. But really what we do is we go in and help sports create environments where girls and women can thrive. And usually that's by educating everyone about what it is to be a woman or a girl, physically and emotionally and sort of psychosocially. So yeah, so we work across the Women's Super League now. We do a lot of work with, that's probably one of our proudest sports projects, because we've got a female athlete health lead in every single WSL 1 and 2 club. What we said to the FA once we'd done some insight work was, you could put education out there and say, please, can you do this? But people won't. They're too busy. If you don't mandate it, it won't happen. But also, even if you do mandate it, people will learn and they'll go back to their environments, and everyone else will be like, okay, you just did that course, you're banging on about it, I'm just going to carry on and do what I'm doing. So you have to have leadership and accountability. You have to have someone who's saying, this is this is a golden thread that we move through the whole of the club, whether you're the kit person, the facilities manager, the coach, the strength and conditioning coach, nutritionist, etc. Like, everyone has to look at, like, what is different about this female than the men I've coached before, and they have to be accountable. They have to be able to say, yes, we're doing something. And so to the WSL's credit, they were like, yeah, well, absolutely. So they mandated the development course, and they put a female athlete health lead in every club, and they mandated that lead had to develop a strategy. So we've taken those leads through this kind of female health leadership course. So now the whole system is just like, everybody knows more, and there's someone who's accountable for keeping that going and making sure everyone's, got sort of skin in that game.
Yeah, no, amazing. And there is a book, you've written a book on some of this stuff. Is that's available for?
Yeah. So when we were in lockdown, I think the first thing we decided was, we said there's a mantra that people say when we do our talks, and it's like, why didn't I know this? So we're like, let's put it all in a book. So that, and that book is directed to women, and now it's been translated in about eight languages, I think. So that's amazing, because it's really just to improve body literacy, so understanding your body as a woman, but through the context of being and staying active, because you can learn as much as you want about your body, but it's when you get up and try and move it and try and swim when you're on your period, or try and run and you've got a bigger bust and it's not well supported, or have a baby and you go to do your Pilates class and you start, wetting yourself. Like, it's when you move that all of these disruptors come into play. And it's actually like, if you can understand your body and feel empowered to do something about those things, then they are removed as barriers, and you can have this sort of lifelong relationship with physical activity and sport, which is what we want for everyone.
Yeah, no, amazing. So you mentioned there about the father to a teenage girl. For men that are listening to this episode that are either parents to young girls or similar to myself, working in a space where we've got the ability to influence women's sport, what would some of your messages be around how we can be more effective allies, how we can be more effective at working in that space?
Yeah, I think one of our real key messages is, this is not just for women, this is about women, and actually it's everyone's responsibility. And one of the things we help men in this space do, because there are lots of men, teachers, dads, coaches, etc., is feel safe and secure in doing so, because I think it would be really clumsy to go into a group of dad coaches and go, right, well, the girls are having periods, so you need to talk to them about the products, or and the dads go, well, and then some other mums say, what are you doing, giving my daughter a tampon? And so it's like, we also talk about the boundaries, the scope of your role, what's completely normal and appropriate to say. And we do need to start normalizing some of these conversations, because people are fairly conservative about what they want to talk about. We've just recorded some content for British Cycling, and I was saying to the person who was leading the project, I was like, I just did a video where I said vulva and vagina more than once, because saddle health in women's cycling is so important and is a huge barrier. And I was like, that, and I was saying it as well as saying, make sure you've got your fueling right for your ride, and make sure, you take your bib shorts off afterwards, because they're going to be, but it was just really nice to normalize that. So I think we need to feel safe and secure in having these conversations, but we also need to accept that some of these things can be a normal part of how we support athletes.
There's so much insight in that, and I think it's why I was really interested in hearing about the approach with the WSL, and just hearing what you're saying. And again, we've had a number of conversations with guests on this podcast around that, that the approach of understanding, or the need to understand the system and how you approach things from a systematic way. And I can see through the work that you're doing and why it is so important. of how to approach it in that way. So you aren't just targeting men and then women in separate spaces, because it's so important that they're both can understand from where people might slip up, where they might have a lack of experience, and just to normalize those sorts of conversations, I think is really important if you really want to get any progress in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also people perhaps get a bit intimidated or overwhelmed when we talk about like making sport really work for women, because I think they think it's going to go to all the taboo topics. And yes, those are included. Menstrual health in sport is so important, whether you've got elite athletes who are suffering from RED-S and don't know that not having a period isn't normal. But also you've got things like, even how we design coaching. I was talking to Mike at Cardiff Met and about the work they're doing, and about getting students to really think about the way we are taught in our coaching qualifications is, if we want to improve this, we set up this drill, we set up a pitch that's this big, so that we know that we're doing, we can encourage this much running or whatever. But he's like, even that is based on men, and then women who take smaller strides and who have different biomechanics are suddenly not getting the same stimulus from a coaching drill that is designed to give a specific stimulus. Or developing injury resilience and making sure that we remove some of those sex specific risk factors. Those things shouldn't feel intimidating or taboo, because they are just part of what it means to be a coach or be a sports scientist. So, there are also safe places to start. And sometimes with sports, we start in the places that aren't, we don't start with urinary stress incontinence. We start with something that, more like injury resilience and teaching girls to move well. That actually has a really profound impact on things like pelvic health. But we can start in a space that feels, less stigmatized, and meet people sort of where they are, but still help them make improvements.
And I think going back to one of the points that you made earlier, your experience working with British Cycling and getting that and getting that sports bra into the bag from very, very far removed from that elite system, but all the rhetoric at the time around marginal gains and that focus, to hear that come back, and almost that there was just no understanding or work in that space is fascinating.
Honestly, it was absolutely bonkers. And you're right. For probably the previous 8 years, we've been in this marginal gains era, of different feathers in the pillows, and quite rightly so. We made some sort of remarkable tweaks to a system that then allowed athletes to be more available, stay healthier, perform better. But like you say, I was working with researchers who were like, this is a huge performance advantage. I mean, if you've got girls who are suffering from premenstrual symptoms 2-3 days a month, every month across a 4-year cycle, the impact on availability, and not just whether she can turn up or not, but the quality of what she can do. And but no one was intervening. No one was saying, okay, how do we improve, what she can do on those days, or the sports can have up to sort of 4% effect on performance. These are not small things, and they were being completely overlooked.
And to bring it back then to stay on that systems topic then, so transitioning into leading your own company, developing something with such a powerful mission, what are some of the key lessons you've learned then about leading and also influencing the system around you?
Oh gosh, I mean, it's been hard, and I think asking people to rethink things is really hard. Asking people to rethink things in deeply institutionalized systems like education, like sport, asking people, why don't girls wear shorts in hockey, which is what Tess Howard's work's been really pushing, and then go, well, we just always have worn skirts here, but why? Well, it's just what we've always done. Why do girls can't wear coloured undershorts at Wimbledon in case, they're on their period? We just don't do that. Those deeply institutionalised, when you're asking them to reflect, rethink, and perhaps change for the betterment of half the people who are there, it seems so obvious to you, and nothing happens. And I think it can be a very frustrating place. And leadership is full of those frustrations. It's like, you can see what you want to achieve, but for some reason, the system is not moving in that direction. So I think there's an element of patience, and there's an element of problem solving, and seeing that as a problem to solve. Okay, well, where do I need to nudge people forward? What do I need to show people? What do I need to tell people? what do I need to just go and do without asking for permission and asking for forgiveness, like, and really kind of thinking about it like that sort of complex, messy problem. But I also think I've learned so much about communication and influence as a leader working in a space where, again, we're bringing up topics that's for some feel uncomfortable, because for people to stay in the room and actually engage with you, they have to feel comfortable. That you, that they believe in you, and you're not going to make them feel too uncomfortable or expose them, or judge them. And men come into the space thinking, I don't actually know any of this stuff. They don't want to come to a space where we go wag wag. They want to come to a space where we go, of course, why would you? It's just okay. Like, let's all start from ground zero. So I think, and I guess it goes to creating those kind of vulnerable, empathetic spaces, and that are really free from judgment, to help people kind of start a journey from wherever they're from. And also, one of the biggest things we've found over the past 5 years is finding the right people is so important. We were a small business, and we couldn't afford to make mistakes, but we did, like every business, in like getting the wrong people in at the wrong time or for the wrong role. And now I think we look around, and we've got incredible people who are aligned in our values, aligned in our purposes, but also who we get on with, and we can be human with. We can come as our like full selves, which might sound a bit cliche, but actually for us it makes our working environment really, really healthy. And I think it's better to have, I heard this quote, it's better to have a hole than an arsehole. And what that meant was, in terms of your team, it's better to have a gap than someone who is draining your energy or your resources or creating chaos. I don't think we've ever had an asshole in the world, but I truly believe having the right people in the right roles and being confident enough to change it if that's not right is really important as a leader, because then everything just gets elevated when everyone's kind of pulling in the same direction. So yeah.
Yeah, some amazing insights there. So one last question before we move on to kind of some of the wrap up stuff. So as you've talked about, you studied at Cardiff Met. We recently awarded you an honorary degree, and I was there on that day, and I heard you give your speech to the students. And I'm just going to quote back to you some of what you said, and then I'm going to ask you a question on it, if that's okay. So you said to the students that were there on the day, I encourage you to go out into the world and be disruptive. When something frustrates you or shocks you, use the energy to challenge the status quo. Find the thing that you are intolerant of and use your skills to make it better. Don't use your knowledge, use your empathy, your curiosity, and your communication skills, and do something that matters to you. And in doing so, they are bound to make a difference to others. So it was a sensational kind of, skin was on tingling when you delivered that message on the day. So I just wanted to, if I could just finish this session. So as an accomplished academic, why did you focus on encouraging people to use their empathy, curiosity, and communication? And how have those things been important to you in your career?
I've loved every part of my career, but it's not been until now that I'm doing what I feel like I was meant to do, and it couldn't have come without all that's come before it. And so the other thing I encourage, I mean, it kind of goes back to the say yes bit. It's like, try things, go on different journeys. Don't expect your journey to be linear, because everything you're doing is leading you somewhere hopefully you're meant to end up. But this bit of my career, which is so aligned to my values, allows me to be me, and is truly like a sort of mission led, and that sounds all very grand, but we're really trying to change something, in whatever small or big way we can. And what I really want for everyone, and for those graduates who've worked so hard, is to find what that is for them, because I just know that everyone has something. And for some people it might be like in the area of finance, which for me would feel very alien. But because some people's values are make loads of money so I can go on loads of holidays. It's like, that's not what mine are. But it's like, the first starting point really is understand your values, and then do something that's aligned to that. But the disruptive bit and the sort of intolerance bit is the energy that you get from being intolerant of something is just so powerful that I think if we have more people who are willing to go, I'm actually going to try and change that, I'm not going to part with it, I think so many amazing things would happen. And just having the confidence to do that, and that, because we all come with our own different experiences and different backgrounds, that would make so many changes across the board, not just in the area that I work in women and girls. So yeah, so all I think about when I'm talking to groups of students is if one or two of those leave and kind of go, yeah, I know exactly what that's going to be for me. I just think how brilliant, just unleashing these little rebels into the world.
No, brilliant. So before we move on to some of the wrap-up questions, so where can people go to find out more about you and what you do? And we referenced the book earlier. It's the Female
Yeah,
Body
it's called the
Bible.
Female Body Bible. Yeah, the Female Body Bible is available on Amazon or I believe wherever you get books. There's also an audio book if you'd like to listen to me, Baz and Bella, read into your ears. And we are at the Well, www.thewell-hq.com, which is our website. You can find information about the online courses we have, but also just about us and what we do and some of our case studies. And also follow us on socials because we've got an amazing digital marketing lead who keeps people up to date with all of the kind of news and goings on in the world of women's health and sport, but also women's sport, and also just silly things that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. So, and also sign up for our newsletter because people really enjoy catching up on that.
Brilliant. Well, I hope I get you a few more followers from today's episode. So thanks so much. Right, last few questions then. So, what is the one book, podcast, or resource that you've either gifted or recommended the most to someone, and why?
I mean, I think I have to say Brené Brown, because she was so influential to me in terms of being a really amazing communicator and storyteller. So I would recommend any of her books. And actually, I'm just listening to her most recent one, which is called Strong Ground. So she's got a new one out. But any of her podcasts, her books, I just think are an incredible show of evidence-based storytelling, which really has an impact.
Great. So can you tell us about an experience you've had that you would never want to repeat, but it's profoundly changed you for the better?
Oh my goodness, that's a good one. I think it would be having my first child. And I say that because it was a really very hard, sort of horrific experience. Birth was a horrific experience for me, and it impacted me deeply and horribly for a while afterwards. But obviously, I wouldn't change it for the world because I have him and I have my wonderful son. But I kudos to everyone who's having babies every day because it's not easy.
Is there anything you've changed your mind about recently?
Well, I mean, since I've only mentioned paddle once and we're nearly at the end, racket sports. So I used to love the idea of like, being a summer's day playing tennis, but however much I tried to play tennis, I could not. So I sort of had resigned myself to the fact I would never be a racket sport player. Then a year ago, I took up paddle, had a short intermission when I ruptured my Achilles. That's a common theme, middle-aged women taking up new sports and getting broken. But I have learnt my lesson. I'm doing lots of strength and conditioning, and I'm absolutely adoring paddle. It's an amazing sport, and I'm really enjoying having run in straight lines on my own. I'm really enjoying being with other people.
And so, if you were starting your career again, what would you not do?
I would not be afraid to put myself forward earlier for things that sound boring, like committees, because actually I've just been sort of advocating for the amazing learnings you get from being on a board, and we haven't got enough young people on boards. And I think as a young academic or young in my career, I thought, why would my voice be welcome on, a committee or a steering group or a board? And I actually think, that's who we need speaking up. So I think I would be less afraid to put myself into those positions and have a voice around the table. Because actually, if you want system change, you need to get in at the governance level of that system. And a board is a brilliant place to do that.
Brilliant. And then very last question. So if from next week in the Well HQ, you only had 2 hours in that week to do what you normally do, where would you spend your time in order to still be successful?
Oh, that's brilliant. Judo, I think at the moment I would spend it thinking, because we've been really busy and we've spent a lot of time doing. And one of the things that I really notice is when you're doing a lot of the doing, you don't have time to do a lot of the thinking. And when you're trying to change systems, when you're trying to change people's behavior, it is so important to have time to just mull over what you've done, how it's landed, what went right, what went wrong, and what you could change when you do it again. And so, yeah, if I had a week that only had 2 hours in, I think I would spend it reflecting, thinking, and kind of ideating. Is that a word? Having
Yeah, go
ideas
for it.
about what might be a really brilliant way to work in the future.
Amazing. And maybe squeeze in the odd game of paddle.
I definitely have a game of paddle.
No, thank you so much, Emma, for joining us today. It's been an episode that's absolutely packed full of insights and takeaways. And I'm sure that there'll be many people that take a lot from today's episode. So thank you so much for joining us.